Today is Thursday. That means we're now 2 weeks away from kicking this season off. What are some of the top positional battles that we're tuned into?
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. As always, terms apply. Happy Thursday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. It's Thursday. We're 2 weeks out from kicking off the 2024 season. And so today, we're going to be spending some time talking positional battles. What are some of the positions that we predict will have a very tightly contested battle all the way up to kickoff in terms of talking fall camp? We're going to start this first segment, talk about the defensive battles, then we'll work our way into the offensive battles here in just a couple minutes. So, Kenton, give me your top defensive positional battle that you're looking forward to seeing how it wages out these last 2 weeks.
Honestly, it's not so much the battle as who's going to be there at all. This Sam linebacker position, okay? Say what you want about, hey, Peyton Wilson was by a landslide our best player. Forget defensive player, was our best player last year. A close second, a guy who, most people would say, hey, Aiden White may have been the most impactful because of his coverage, but a guy who by all metrics, eye test, all that type of stuff, and the numbers in terms of second leading tackler and all that, it was Jalen Scott who played the Sam. This is a true story. This is no exaggeration. No, and if you don't believe me, go back and Google this. I looked up the Clemson game from last year because I said that's about the 8th game of the season. We should have seen, somebody else in that rotation at the Sam linebacker. So I watched the condensed version of the game, or actually, no, I watched the highlights from the Clemson game. I did not see a single snap where Jalen Scott was not on the field. Now, that may be small to some, but I say that that's a very big deal because when you talk about that position in Tony Gibson's defense, it's extremely important because you are often going to be the edge setter to the wide side of the field. That's very important. That is very important. In college football, where you have these extremely wide hash marks, the ability to set that edge is vitally important. So I want to see not only who's going to be starting there, but how they're going to be impactful.
I think it's an excellent point because we spend a ton of time talking about the absence of Peyton Wilson. I feel like we should also talk about the absence of Jalen Scott for the exact reasons that you outlined. Jalen Scott was the second leading tackler behind Peyton last year. And so having to replace not just your leading tackler, but your leading two tacklers, both being linebackers, that's a difficult task. There's going to be a lot of upcoming eyeballs on who will win that job, considering there's Sean Brown, who we think will probably be the will linebacker. So will that leave the Sam and Mike to be Devon Betty? Will it be Caden Fordham? We saw a couple weeks ago that Tony Gibson was talking about Kelvin McBride, possibly Kamal Bonner. It seems like there's 5 names for 3 spots, and we feel like we have one of them being Sean Brown nailed down. So being very transparent here, in a lot of episodes last season, we were very highly critical of Devon Betty. It felt like there were plenty of plays where he felt out of position or just couldn't finish a tackle. And so Devon Betty's a guy that really needs to take a step forward for this linebacking crew this year. Caden Fordham, I've been impressed with Caden Fordham, but again, looking at the absences of both Wilson and Scott, Caden Fordham has to take a massive step forward this year. So I agree with you. I think not exactly so much in the context of competition, but who the other 2 linebackers are going to be. We feel really good about Sean Brown. Could we possibly see Wyatt Wright in the mix as well? He's a JUCO guy, entered the program over the offseason. There's a lot of names in circulation, but 2 of them are going to have to take emphatic steps forward here by the time we kick off here in 2 weeks. My top positional battle on defense, I'm looking in the back half of the secondary, whether that's safety and or nickels. There's a little bit of chatter about who will be opposite of Aiden White and cornerback. I think it's pretty clearly Brandon Cisse or Corey Coley. But when you're looking back at the safeties and nickels, I think there's probably 4 names for 2 spots. You have Jihad Carter in the mix. You have T-Mac Cooley in the mix. Devin Boykin is going to be in the mix at some point. We don't know how healthy he's going to be. once we kick off. I would anticipate maybe later in September is when you'll see his return to the field. You also have DK Kaufman, who came over from Auburn. What position is he going to look to be playing here once we kick off the season? There's a lot of very talented guys for a very limited amount of spots. Kenta, what are your thoughts on how it might potentially shake out there?
You know, the linebacking core and the defensive backfield seem to be facing inverse problems because with the defensive backfield, there are too many talented guys, or not too many. There are so many talented guys. You're struggling to find out who is going to be starting and all that, but you trust that everything is going to be okay because these guys are special. You know, from what I was hearing, Cisse had been lights out. And so to hear that there's a push for him, that is something that's great to hear. I love to hear that that's a competition there. And as far as the nickels and the safeties go, the ways in which they have so much versatility in this 3-3-5, the ways in which sometimes you see a situation where there are 3 safeties on the field. Sometimes you'll see a situation where you got double nickels on the field. And it's like, hey, you know, you're rocking out with that and you've got a single high safety. I'm very intrigued to see how this plays out, not only from a standpoint of who gets the most snaps, but from a standpoint of how does the scheme adjust to having this many talented DBs at once, because this is no knock on the DBs of the past. But I don't think that the DB room has ever been as talented as it is right now.
And now that I think about it, I actually forgot a name. Bishop Fitzgerald is also going to be in that mix. I think he quietly had a really solid season last year, so he's just another name to throw into that pile. If I had to guess right now on August the 15th, I think Jihad Carter will probably be the starting safety. And nickel, I think I'm going to lean DK Kaufman. I've heard some very positive buzz about Kaufman coming over. In saying all that, you have to factor in how much or how frequent that rotation will fluctuate based on switching in and out. I think Bishop Fitzgerald will get a high amount of snaps. I think T-Mac McCooley might get a decent amount of run as well. I've seen plenty of clips on social media of him in fall camp making some plays. I saw a clip of Ronnie Royal breaking up a pass on Justin Jolie hit social media on Wednesday. I know it's just one clip. We tend not to try to overanalyze these one singular clips, but that clip in particular got me fired up for Ronnie Royal because Justin Jolie, we know I think he had the top number of contested catches amongst tight ends in 2023. And for Ronnie Royal to break up a pass that was perfectly placed, but to swipe that ball out of Jolie's hands upon the way down, I see that as an absolute win. Even though the pass was broken up and it was perfectly thrown, I'm way more excited about Ronnie Royal in that clip in particular than I am about a drop pass.
You know, Ronnie Royal is another one in the long line of Ken saw the tape and said that kid's a freak.
Yeah,
I would love for that prediction to pan out here. I think that he can be a very special young man, but you're absolutely right. Again, you can never have too many good players. And the beauty of this position, the beauty of really every position in football outside of quarterback, you can always find a way to put those guys on the field. If a guy is an outstanding right tackle to where you're like, hey, the guy behind him is really good too, but he just can't play right tackle, you can put him somewhere else on the field to block. If we're talking about defense in this term, then these defensive backs, you think there's too many people who can cover on the field at one time? Why do you think that? Where'd that thought come from? As somebody who's played with some excellent defensive backfields where it's like, hey, all of those guys went on to play pro ball, and I'm damn excited about it. I'll take it. I'll take it every time and twice on Sunday. If there is a way that I can guarantee, hey, we'll have a bunch of guys who are freaks of nature, who are, Ronnie Royal being the guy that's extremely young but can do a little bit of everything. If we have a bunch of guys that we look at in that type of thought, I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at it one bit.
Barring that everyone stays healthy, and fingers crossed, we're so far so good in fall camp. The best of the best is going to rise to the top, and I think that's the main takeaway here. Having this many players vying for so few spots, that's an overall positive. And I know there is a sentiment like maybe we have too much talent at one position, but that's how Ohio State, that's how Alabama, the Georgias, the Oregons, that's how they've risen to where they are, because they have so much talent that only the elite can get on the field for them. So a little bit of a microcosm of that. NC State has very healthy competition, both in the secondary and some at linebacker as well. Coming up next, we're going to get into the top positional battles on offense after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's Thursday sponsor is Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. This makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever before. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, so using their killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Using these last-minute deals, which I mentioned, you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it, they got it, including college football, which is nearly just 2 weeks away. Toggling their all-in pricing feature on the app will show your total up front, so you receive zero surprise fees at checkout. And as always, you can get that panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect upon arrival. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, and again, create an account and use redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics. This includes conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college expanded playoffs, and so much more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Middle portion of our Thursday show, now switching sides to the offense, talking our top positional battles that we have an eye on for the offense as we get closer to kicking this thing off. Kenton, you want to start this one as well?
Sure thing. I'm obsessed with the twos today, okay? I want to know who's going to be the running back two and who's going to be the wide receiver two. Those are two position battles that I am very intrigued in. I think that Jordan Waters all but has that RB1 spot locked up. Who's going to be the change of pace back? Who's going to be the back that can show up and show out consistently in terms of carrying the offense when Jordan Waters is worn down, isn't available, whatever the case may be? You need more than one back to be good in today's game anyway. I'm excited to see how that shakes out. And the second one, who is going to be the wide receiver opposite of KC? Who is going to be the guy that is the pressure release valve for KC that can kind of set the table in that way? Because we talked about it before in terms of Dakari Collins and Wesley Grimes being mentioned as guys who are very likely to be the starters over Noah Rodgers. But I'll tell you what, that's a good threes company to have at that wide receiver two spot, to where it's like, hey, KC's going to be your main feature guy, but these guys can also get it done. I'm very excited to see who can make what happen out of that group, because Wesley Grimes is obviously the burner of the group. He can absolutely fly. Dakari Collins, he's the big body bends of the group. He's the one that boxes guys out, goes up there, turns 50-50 balls into 70-30 balls. And then you've got Noah Rodgers, who is the freak. He is the one that can do a little bit of everything very well. It's just about experience and tying it all together. So that's what you're looking at there. And for the running back position, you're asking yourself, is Kendrick Raphael going to hold serve? Is Smothers going to come in and make something happen? Is Duke Scott, with all the great things we've been hearing about him, and the fact that I believe straight line speed, he may be the fastest running back on the roster. Is he going to be the change of pace back? Because he can pop one and take it 60 any moment. Very excited to see who the wide receiver two and running back two are this year.
Yeah, we're in lockstep here on the offense, so I too will spend a little bit of time on both. In terms of the running back room, I think it is very fascinating. We know that Jordan Waters will be the bell cow back, but who will be that change of pace back? Is it going to be Kendrick Raphael? I would assume that he might be the first option for number two, being how much we saw him last year and the bits of success that he provided in a couple of those key spots. I think of that Miami game in particular, kind of closed the game for us with that breakaway touchdown after breaking through a couple Miami tacklers. But then you get to Duke Scott, and we talked about this about a week ago. We keep hearing Duke Scott in conversations for a young guy that could break onto the scene here in 2024. And oftentimes, the saying is, when there's smoke, there's fire. And I think if the coaching staff is continuing to rave about Duke Scott this much in fall camp, I think there's a pretty decent shot we're going to see him a decent amount once the season begins, whether that's early in the non-conference when hopefully some of those games get out of hand in our favor, or perhaps you get a steady feed of Duke Scott for the entire season, kind of like Kendrick Raphael and last year, although that was much more out of necessity. Duke Scott could find himself in conversations for a pretty solid amount of carries. Then you talk about Hollywood Smothers, and previously we said I would anticipate Hollywood Smothers would be kick return would be his main function, but being that he is probably one of the quicker running backs on the squad, he could find a decent amount of carries somewhere in this offense. So it will be very interesting to watch who gets the second most carries on the team. I would probably lean Kendrick Raphael, but we're going to have to see how that shakes out. Now, jumping over to the wide receivers, we talked, I believe it was just yesterday, that Wesley Grimes and Jakari Collins may very likely be your X and your Y receivers against Western Carolina. No reason to panic because Noah Rogers will come along as he comes along. But like Kenton was talking about, who's going to be that second favorite target? We know that KC is probably going to be heavily favored in this offense. I do find this interesting to talk about, though, because Grayson McCall, I can't remember if it was ACC kickoff or it was on the ACC road trip. He named Noah Rogers as one of his favorite targets so far. And so if it's Wesley Grimes, Jakari Collins, who knows? Who knows how that'll shake out? Wesley Grimes, like Kenton was talking about, I think he's very, very underrated. And I know we kind of said that about a lot of different guys, but Wesley Grimes is a wide receiver I don't think is being talked about enough. He had a great spring game. He has really good tape from limited fashion over at Wake Forest. I think Wesley Grimes can be a dude for us. And then there's been a lot made out of Jakari Collins recently as well, kind of finally coming into his own here, finally healthy and being a full-blown leader in this wide receiver room. It's going to be very interesting to watch. Robert and I also likes to use that flex Y position. I would anticipate that's where Justin Jolie will be. Juice Farine, I've heard, is having a really solid camp. Perhaps you see some of him. But for me, the biggest battle in terms of pass catchers is going to be who's going to be the X, who's going to be the Y, and then some of that depth coming in behind them. I think we've probably hit on the main names being Rogers, Grimes, and Collins, but who will be the two starters against Western? We're going to have to wait and find out. We're going to round out our Thursday show talking about Casey Concepcion and his odds for winning the Biletnikoff. Perhaps they're better than you might think. More on this after a quick word from our sponsors. Last couple minutes here of our Thursday show. Wanted to talk a little about Casey Concepcion and his odds for being involved with the Biletnikoff Award. Now, On3 released their graphic on Wednesday outlining the top 10 receivers in contention for this award. Casey Concepcion is ninth best at plus 2,200. Kenton, do you see a reality where Casey Concepcion actually does bring home the Biletnikoff Award?
You know, the more I think about it, the more I say yes, because when you look at the last few winners, it hasn't been guys that were on the receiving court by themselves, because it's really easy to target those guys and say, hey, we are going to stop him at all costs. I think that's what's going to hold back some of his competition for this award, because they don't have wide receiver rooms and pass catching units that are as stacked as NC State's. You could put KC in with any group. If he's in shape to do it, you can put him in with any group, and he'll be a dangerous weapon. He'll be the most dangerous weapon, most likely, in those groups. So I could really see a world where he has a phenomenal, world, like record-breaking type of year, because there's so much talent around him. It's hard to say, hey, you can eliminate KC, leave everybody else one-on-one, forget everything else. We need to bracket him at all costs.
It's kind of funny, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Some of the conversations around all the other weapons may take away receptions from Casey Concepcion, but for that same reason, he might even have more than he had last year. Well, maybe not quite as much, but being that there are a lot more weapons to focus on, that could open the door for KC to have a lot more explosive plays.
Absolutely.
It could very easily go both ways on this. So as crazy as it sounds, I think he absolutely could win this award. If McCall has the season we think that he can, and he keeps dishing the ball out to KC and just letting him cook, he could have a very electric year. And some of the top receivers on that list being the Luther Burden or the twin receivers, not actual twins, but the duo of receivers out of Oregon that are some of the faster in the country. Then, of course, you're going to have your receivers from Ohio State, whether that be Egbuka or the freshman. There is very steep competition, but Kenton was absolutely right. I don't know if any of those teams, maybe outside of Ohio State, have those arsenal of weapons around that main wide receiver that could make a Biletnikoff prospect as dangerous as Kevin Concepcion may be. One more question I think maybe ties into this. We talked about KC and his potential to be featured on punt return this year. Do you think if KC goes crazy on punt return, would that help his case from the Biletnikoff, or would that be factored into another category?
It really depends. Like if he does something absolutely insane, maybe. While people like to say and pretend, oh, I don't care about that. It won't matter at all at the best receiver. It will. If it's close between him and another guy, and you say, and he can return punts, he's definitely going to get an edge in that regard.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but there is an award for an all-purpose.
I believe that's the Paul Hornung Award.
I think it's the Paul Hornung Award. That's for basically all-purpose. That's an all-purpose award. So perhaps KC would fall further into that category. But yeah, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, I think KC is a very legitimate prospect to bring home the Blitnikoff Award. There's been a long list of extremely impressive receivers to win that award, but we're talking about a freshman All-American last year, and he was featured out of necessity in 23, but in 24, being that there are so many more weapons to be dealt with, he could see an uptick in production.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think about the circumstances for an uptick in production, if we struggle running the ball, which has been a problem for NC State in the past, which I hope is not the case, you could easily see a situation where KC again remains a center point of this offense. But again, with guys around them that make it tough to say, hey, listen, across the board, we're going man, and we're going to double this guy. And if they can let somebody else beat us, fine, they'll beat us, because you'll see a lot of DBs looking at the back of some red and white helmets. And I'll tell you, they're not good barbers trying to do a lineup. They're just getting cooked. So, I'm very excited to see how this season turns out.
We'll get into some over-unders tomorrow, but I do want to drop one here at the end of this Thursday episode. I believe it was on ACC Road Trip. Kevin Concepcion was saying he's looking somewhere between 12 and 13 total touchdowns this year. Kenton, I'm going to go ahead and set the line at 13.5. Do you think he goes under or over 13.5 total touchdowns?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I can't vote for a push because it's 13.5.
Exactly.
I'll go under. I think he gets exactly 13.
Okay, well, I'll play the other side. I'll go over. I think KC's going to finish with 14 touchdowns this year. I think 12 will be receiving, and I think he's going to run in too. I know his primary focus is going to shift to being a wide receiver this year, but using that creativity from Robert and I think he's going to run in too. Maybe a jet sweep, or could just be something straight out of the backfield. I'm going to go with 14. A good preface for tomorrow's episode. We're going to do a lot more of these under-overs. I think there's a lot of fascinating stats to kind of sort through before we kick this thing off, but that'll do it for us here on Thursday. As always, thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments down in the comment box. Tell us what you think are the top positional battles to watch for defense, also for offense, and tell us what you think about the odds of KC Concepcion bringing home the Blitnikoff Award, currently 9th best at plus 2,200. Mash that subscribe button if you have not already. We'll catch you all back here on Friday for Fan Friday, and until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.